I have Peter and Martha Klopfer in front of me. I welcome you guys to what we call tongue-tied interviews, ride and tie interviews. I'm so glad that you are a part of this today, and glad you're going to talk with me about your experiences with the ride and tie.
Good to meet you.
All right. You guys have several distinctives. You are the first team that traveled from the east to the west to engage in ride and tie back in 1975, the fifth world championship. If my research is right, counting the 2010 short course, you've done 8 world championships, and you have 3 man-woman top finishes and a couple of top 10s and an 11 and a 13. So you have not only been you've not only competed, but you've been competitive, and that's really neat too.
We also were in the first UK international.
Okay.
With
I
where we
remember.
were the first team overall.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I didn't read far
Sort
enough
of
in.
exciting because we had 2 teams against us who were made up of members of the UK national pentathlon team, who were better riders and better runners than we were, and it was very exciting. But they didn't have the tactics down, so we finally reeled them in. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I know, and we will talk about this later. You've been great tacticians. I want to hear about some more of that in a little bit. But first, let me talk a little bit about how you first found ride and tie. One of my favorite books is Bud John's book, "What Is This Madness?" And he says that he starts getting these letters from this woman in the East, and responds back and forth to the letters. But how did you hear about ride and tie even before then?
Okay, well, I heard about it from a horse magazine, I think probably Western Horseman,
Mm-hmm.
one of those, something that I read there. And we were approaching our wedding anniversary and my birthday both fall in June.
Mm-hmm.
And we were approaching my 40th birthday and our 20th wedding anniversary in that June. I thought it'd be kind of fun to do something a little different. And I mean, you also have to know I grew up in California, so
Okay.
I'm a transplant to the south,
Okay.
or the southeast. Anyway, we decided when we heard about this that we'd like to do it for our anniversary. So that's when we called Bud.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask you a little bit before we get you all the way out to the championship. I know also again from the book that you'd only been running for a few years at that point, but you had an awful lot of success with your running. He also says that you were a great horsewoman, but he doesn't give any details. So what were you doing horse riding during that time?
We've had horses in our backyard ever since we settled here in North Carolina, which was shortly before we started the ride and tie stuff. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I used to go down to Griffith Park and ride rented horses there. And my mother would go with me. And the better horses went out under English saddle. So generally that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one horse that was being boarded there that I got to know because his owner was in jail. And so I was helping to exercise him, and then eventually I bought the horse for the price of his back board.
Mm-hmm.
So that was back before we moved here. And then since we come to North Carolina, we've always had several horses here, mostly just pleasure trails, and then I'm quite interested in dressage.
Mm-hmm.
We did some jumping, some combined training early on. In later years, I've stopped the jumping part and just been doing dressage, but right up until present time.
Oh, wow. Neat. So tell me a little bit about what it was like to be a female runner at that time. You were running marathons just shortly after Boston even allowed women to compete. What was it like to run then as a woman?
It was different, and especially from the South, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I never concentrated on marathons. I did my first one in whatever it was. I guess the same year as our first riding tie.
Yeah, the agreement we made was that I would get riding lessons because I'd been just a farm boy riding farm horses
Uh-huh.
with horses all my life, but never riding properly. So I realized that to do riding tie, I was going to have to get some instruction. So the agreement was that if Martha ran a marathon, which I never thought she would do, then I'd take lessons. But she ran a marathon, set a North American women's record, age record. That was what, 3:12 or something like that. A pretty good time. The record lasted for 7 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So then I signed up for lessons with an old Englishman who was a former English cavalry instructor. And I remember one day after our lessons, pulling my boots off, turning them upside down and letting him see the blood drip out. And he just smiled and said, "Well, good, I'm glad to see you're gripping." So that was my introduction to proper riding.
And so you were already a runner then before Martha.
Well, I had been in school as a soccer player
Mhm.
and cross-country ski racer. So I was always running as part of my training. I didn't start competing until accompanying my kids to Junior Olympics, where because they were runners.
Mhm.
I met a few Masters runners who introduced me to what was then the U.S. Masters team.
Right.
And so I joined that, and as did Martha, and began running competitively. That was just when I turned 40.
Okay. Wow.
I've been running all my life before that, just not competitive.
Right. Wow. So now let's get you headed out to California. Did you trailer your horses out there, or did you rent or buy out there?
No, as we got to know, the first year we went, but got the word around and we talked to a couple of horse owners. Nobody would trust their beloved, valuable horse to somebody that they didn't know at all, or very few would. But we met Cliff Lewis, who was a character who lived in Nevada and was an endurance rider. And he had an old horse named Blackjack. And Blackjack was supposed to be 16 years old, but it was probable that he was actually a little, not that age, because when Cliff started first competing with him, he was supposed to be at least 5 years old, but he wasn't really that old. Anyway, Cliff had his own way of doing things, but we rode Blackjack for our first ride, and there's some stories with that. And then the second year, which was the one that's in the film up at Tahoe, that was also Blackjack. And then I think we rode him a third year, but that time they had a lot of SPCA vets that were hanging out at the vet checks and second guessing or looking over the shoulders of the riding tie vets. The riding tie vets all knew Blackjack. They knew that he was a little gimpy, but it didn't mean anything.
Right.
And he was not going to hurt himself by going out there. But the SPCA guys weren't having that, so we got pulled on that ride. So after that, we got to know some of the riding tie people, and most of the top teams would condition 2 horses. At least, but they'd have 2 that they would bring along, and then sort of at the last minute they decide which one they wanted to use, and then their backup horse would be free, and people got to know that we would take care of somebody else's horse. We weren't going to go out there and just blast away and try to win the thing. We were going to take care of the horse and bring us all through. So we got to ride some pretty great horses from a lot of those top teams.
That's great. Yeah, that training 2 horses is a pretty good thing. We bought a horse, it's 8 or 9 years ago now, and then took our good old standby up to I think it was the second time the Worlds was in the East. and he came off the trailer lame, but we had left the other horse home. And I said, I've got a perfectly good horse 500 miles away. What did that, how stupid was that? So, yeah, I get it. Well,
Yeah.
tell me some stories about the 1975, your first one, because you are rookies in lots of ways in riding. I've never done it before, and yet you end up as the top man, woman, and 9th overall. So tell me about that race.
Right. Well, we had just met the horse and just met Cliff, and was really nervous about the whole thing. And I remember going out and walking through the field that was the starting field, and it was full of gopher holes. And I just lost sleep that night, worrying about the horse was going to step in a gopher hole and I'd be over his head and on the ground. Well, as it turned out, at the start, we were through that field before I could possibly take even 3 or 4 breaths.
Yeah.
That horse just flew. And with all of my intentions of kind of riding conservatively and staying toward the back, Blackjack had different ideas. So we were up with the leaders. We went along for a few. I think the first vet check was, I don't know, 10 or 12 miles in. And part of the way along, I realized that I didn't have a right rein. I mean, I had the rein, but it wasn't attached to the bit, because the reins were attached with a snap, and the snap had let loose on that rein. So here I was moving along at a pretty good pace, and Blackjack could see the trail and see the other horses and didn't really need any steering, which is a good thing because I couldn't steer.
Yeah.
So I finally found a field where I could circle him around and get that fixed. So that was kind of the beginning of the race. And then toward the end, there was a water spot right as we were coming up toward the end, and Chuck Stalley was there with Peanuts. I think I've got the name right. Yes.
Right.
And I stopped and let Blackjack drink, and Blackjack was finished drinking and ready to go. And Chuck had taken the bridle off of Peanuts. And so I waited. I wasn't just going to take off and leave him there struggling to keep hold of his horse. I waited for him. And later on, somebody said, well, he was competition. And no, he was another rider, and we take care of ourselves out there, take care of each other. So
that's definitely one of the things I love about riding Ty is, we're pretty fierce competitors, but if something goes wrong, somebody needs your help, the competition ceases. And that's great.
Right.
Yep. Right. What else from 75? Anything else you remember?
Well, the first exchange we made wasn't until the 6 mile mark, because I was in those days concentrating on distance running, and I figured I'd be more efficient. So by the time I got to Blackjack, he was just absolutely standing on his head, watching all the other horses go by, and he couldn't leave. So I was totally out of control when I got aboard, and he went racing down a sand dune and went down on his knees. But my old cavalry instructor had always trained me that when I was in a fast gallop, to have a bridge across the withers,
reins.
And so I basically did a headstand, but then bounced right back into the saddle. So at that point, I figured, well, I guess I'm going to survive this.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
After that, Blackjack quieted down, and I felt a little more confident, and we got along just fine.
So for the rest of the race, did you have those longer ties, or did you adjust?
We had the minimum number of exchanges. In those days, there was a rule you had to have at least 6 exchanges, and it was about a 40-mile course or so.
Not quite that long.
Anyway,
it's over 30.
We had just the minimum number.
Wow, wow. So you actually had about a 35-year career in riding tie. Later, what did you do with exchanges? Did you shorten them up?
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we take into account something like if there were a lot of hills, I was a little bit lighter weight, and Peter's a much bolder downhill runner than I am. So generally I'd be on the horse if there were steeper hills involved.
Yeah.
And people on the ground, but however it would fit into the other exchanges.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the ideal would be for Martha to be on the horse going downhill, since she was the more technically astute rider, and I'd
Technically
be running downhill. And we were probably equally fit on the uphill, but other things being equal, it made more sense for her to be on the horse uphill as well, because she was lighter.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Wow. So 75 was your first race. Other memories from other races that really stand out for you?
Coming in across the finish line first in England,
Yes.
instead of the Yahoos, plate clapping, good show, good show. And as we crossed the finish line, we were handed a mug of Guinness.
All right. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, the horse we had there was an Arabian that had been on the track
Mm-hmm.
fairly recently, just, full out gallop.
He didn't know what a trot was.
And
Right.
he did, but he kind of expected to just full out gallop. So we worked with him a little bit for a few days. We were there ahead of time, and we'd tie him and go off and leave him and come back and get him and all that stuff, trying to get him used to the slower pace. But still, when the dust had settled at the start, he was out front. I positioned him way in the back and had all the intentions of staying back, but
he was a racehorse.
There he was. But we knew that was a very unusual ride and tie also, because we couldn't tie anywhere. We were on the estate of the Earl of whatever it was, and he didn't want any of his trees damaged by having horses tied to them. So he had set hitching posts at mile intervals, and you could only use those posts. You didn't have to use them all, but you couldn't tie anything else.
Right.
So it changed the strategy again quite a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow.
But he settled down. He was smart. And,
yeah,
we had a good ride.
Good. Well, let me ask, Peter, my all-time favorite riding tie quote is one of yours, and again, it's in "What Is This Madness?" And you don't have it sitting in front of you, do you?
No.
Okay, let me read it, and then I want you to, we've already really been talking about this a little bit, but I want you just to expound on that a little bit, but both of you can, how you've come up with tactics, all that kind of thing. But the quote is, it's on page 40, "It's a much more intellectual race than the marathon without being less physical. Both require the utmost of physical condition, but in the marathon, everything goes into training. Once the gun goes off, you start to push your legs, and the only intellectual activity comes after about 20 miles for fighting off fatigue. In riding tie, you have to be thinking every step of the way about your exchanges, that you're never sure your plans and contingencies will work out. Ours didn't, and while running, we had to rethink our planning. It's a great logistical burden, not only what you're going to do, but so it's not detrimental to your partner or the horse. You have to adjust, think through the consequences, and compensate, as well as run and ride." So tell me a little more about that, or a story you might know about that, or whatever.
Well, it seems to me that's all pretty self-evident.
Yeah.
You make plans as to where you're going to make your exchanges, but suddenly you discover that there's another horse already in the place that you would plan to tie, and the only other tie opportunity is a mile down the road. That right away is going to throw off the distance between exchanges for the rest of the race.
Yeah.
So every minor, it's like a game of chess. You plan your moves, but you have to expect that there are going to be contingencies arising that make those moves impossible.
Right, yeah, yeah. I've not done a whole bunch of road races, but I've done a fair amount, and that really is just kind of just one foot in front of the other, and maybe
Oh, for
checking
the long distance race.
yeah, for a
Yeah,
long distance race.
I
Yeah,
mean, shorter races, of course, are going to there are going to be logistics
yeah,
involved
yeah,
because
yeah.
you take into account the other
Right.
people. On a short 10,000-meter cross country race, for example, especially if you're not running against really experienced runners, it's always a good idea to grit your teeth and sprint past them on the uphill,
Hmm.
smiling as you go by. I mean, that demoralizes
Yeah,
any experienced runner.
yeah.
But you wouldn't want to do that on a long race.
Right, right. Yeah. So I got that habit though, where you're just when you're running on the road, it's just kind of one foot in front of the other, and you can kind of almost turn your mind off. And I one time doing ride-in tie happened to kind of slide into that kind of fog, and I ran right past my gray horse tied to a tree right there on the trail, and I ran right by him because I was just focused on the trail ahead of me. And a little ways down the road or trail, realized I should have come upon him by now. And some endurance riders, it was an endurance race that day too, a ride that day too. They came by and said, "Y'all didn't happen to see a gray horse back there?" They said, "Oh yeah, quarter-mile back, there's a gray horse tied to a tree," and that was mine. So, yep, indeed.
We did that once at is it Fraser Park? It was up, the location was up kind of the top of the ridge in Southern California, just at the top where it goes down into the grapevine.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah, we had checked out and picked our tree where we wanted to be, and with the idea that maybe it'd be there, maybe not, but somewhere around here.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually rode the start. I guess I always did, and tied the horse right there. It was a very dusty day. The horse wrapped himself around to the far side of the tree, and it was dusty. And Peter looked, but didn't see him.
Same.
Dust was so thick
Mm-hmm.
that I couldn't see, and I just had assumed that Martha had found the tree occupied and tied him somewhere else down the road.
Until you got to the vet check a couple of miles ahead, and they said, "Okay, but where's the horse?"
Indeed.
But that's again another place where you adapt. I was out there running,
Mm-hmm.
expecting Peter to overtake me after a certain amount of time, and he didn't come. Well, you don't quit, but you throttle back a little bit. You
Mm-hmm.
just run at a slower pace that you can maintain for a longer time.
And I assume in that instance, you've already come through the vet check, so you're wondering, did the horse pass the vet check? Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah.
You have to make all kinds of assumptions, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. So yeah.
Well, since we trained together all
Yeah.
the time, of course, we had the advantage of knowing one another's styles pretty
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little about that. You are a married couple, and there's got to be huge advantages and maybe some disadvantages. What is it like to be a married couple and compete together in riding
I
Well-
can't think of any disadvantages.
time? You got to train together. That was good. Did you typically train doing riding tie or riding and running separately?
No, we usually train together.
Yeah, but yeah, but we didn't often have a chance to. I mean, it didn't make we have done some East Coast riding ties with our own horse as well.
Mhm.
In that case, we would do some riding tie exchanges and stuff
Mhm.
with our own horse just to help get him trained. But I have to say, I think my one major contribution to riding tie was getting Ronnie Luke. Get the name right, Lonnie Newcomb.
Oh yeah.
Involved. Because we put on a small riding tie here sometime in the early 80s, and Bud came. I think he had a Levi's trip in the district anyway, but he came and stayed and started the ride for us. And somehow or other, Lonnie and Kathy heard about it and came down here. And I think that was their first introduction to riding tie, was this little ride that we put on here
And was that probably the first riding tie in the East?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Probably.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably.
Wow. And when you say here, where was it exactly?
Durham.
Okay. Wow.
We were members of the Red Mountain Hounds.
It was up by
Mhm.
Quail Roost. You know where
There's a
that is.
fox hunting
Okay.
group, and they had a hunter pace, which was about a 20-mile long, not that long, but
Hmm.
close to 20, but a marked trail through the woods with jumps, but you could go around the jumps.
Right.
So we just took that trail over and got rid of all the mile markers on it,
Mhm.
and did the riding tie there.
Wow. Wow.
Afterward, the week after they'd had it, it wasn't the same time.
Right. Right. That's neat. I didn't know that Bud had ever been in the East for riding tie. That is really cool. Did he drop the black hat to start the race?
Oh yeah.
All right.
And there was another one in Clifton, Virginia.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And actually, NPR showed up for that. We had Susan Stanberg introduce
How about
interview us.
that? Wow.
Don't ask me what year, but that happened. But it was there, and we had our own horse on that.
We were second.
We were second.
All
That,
right.
that was
That's a story too.
that's a story.
Well, tell the story.
The final leg, I was on our horse, and we were. I was racing against a young woman, pair of sisters, as I recall, who were the team, and they were absolutely reckless, racing through this narrow, heavily wooded trail, and we kept exchanging leads. We were on our own horse, who was a very competitive animal, and there was no holding him back. And I was getting really worried that somebody was going to get hurt because of the nature of the trail. So at one point where I was in the lead and she was coming up to me, I said, let's talk. And we got side by side for a few seconds. And I said, look, this is dangerous. I don't really want to win that badly. If you will stop racing, we'll just ride together. We have about an 800 meter stretch after we leave the woods before we reach the finish line. That's the first time that anybody's going to see us. Let's just ride together, and we get to that opening, then we'll put on a show.
Mm-hmm.
I promise I'll let you win. So she agreed. She was happy to be assured of the victory. So we trotted together at a reasonable, safe pace through the woods. Both of our partners we knew were already at the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
They'd passed us long. They had taken off long before us. And so we hit the opening. We could see the finish line about 800 meters away, and we go in a full racing mode. And I suddenly realized Loki, our horse, he's faster, and I can't hold him back. But I had promised to let her win. And so finally, I was able to just surreptitiously turn him enough that we ran outside the finishing poles. And I just circled back. And so the timer there timed us as 1/10 of a second apart.
Wow. Yes.
She won by 1/10 of a second. And it was a near thing because I tried my best to slow my horse down, but I couldn't.
Yeah, that's great. Because that was
This is the first time that's been publicly
I love it. I love it. That's
Bud
great.
knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Sandberg did.
um, that one was a little bit more planned, but it is amazing how often a 20, 25, 30-mile race comes down to those last few yards. It's pretty amazing, whether it's the runners or the horse, the folks on the horses or whatever. So, indeed. Yeah. And I've got stories kind of like that one as well. Well, I want to shift gears for a second. Peter, you are a zoologist, and I'm so proud that you spent most, if not all, your career at Duke University, because I'm an alum of Duke also. But let me ask you, pick your brain a little bit about horses and riding tie and kind of what's going on there. My horse is just super competitive. He does not want to. He always, like some horses you've been describing, he wants to be up ahead and he's fast. And he somehow understands. He seems to understand. I want to be ahead of those horses. I want to win. He also understands the sport of riding tie amazingly. And sometimes we're riding along before I've even am thinking about a tie. He's putting his head up to a tree and say, "This is a good one here. Tie me here." And just hyper competitive. But just about a year or so ago, my partner and I, we were doing a riding tie, and she had tied him on this long railroad grade. It is in Big South Fork in Tennessee, and so I could see way down that straight shot, and I could see him standing in the middle of the trail. And I first thought, well, that's weird. How did she tie him? And as I got closer, I realized he wasn't tied. He had somehow come loose. And so he just stood there and waited for me. He knew I got to wait for my partner. But the moment I got on his back, he was all business again, and he was ready to take off like lightning. From an evolutionary standpoint, or whatever, what is going on with our horses and the way they know and seem to participate in the sport is almost equal partners?
Well, centuries of breeding.
Okay, you think so? We just bred into them to do what we want.
Relationship to the human, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're fully domestic.
I'm sorry.
They're fully domesticated creatures.
Okay.
They're very much a herd animal. They want to, once they figured out who their herd is, they want to cooperate.
Yeah.
I don't know, something like that. But some people think of the horse as an equal member of a team of three. I think the horse is half. I mean, if you count up the number of legs on your team, the horse has got half of them.
Yep. And the horse has to do the entire course on foot, where we're only doing, whatever portion we're doing. So indeed. Yeah.
Right. So that was the other aspect of the going to the West to do these major rides. We were always on somebody else's horse, and we rarely had a chance to ride the same horse again. So there was always a tendency to be very conservative with the horse and very careful. And the owners would often say, "Oh, you could have used him a lot more. You had a lot left over." And that's all right. To finish with the horse still strong and happy, that was our aim.
Exactly. Yeah. My brother-in-law is my main partner, and he and I borrowed a horse a while back, and she just seemed to be really getting tired. She's a little older horse, about midway through the first loop. And we got her into the vet check, and our owner said, she's snowing, y'all. She's got plenty of energy, y'all. She just pulled one over on you. Ride her harder that next loop. But yep, I get it. Yep. Yeah. Well, what have I not asked about that you'd like to talk about riding tie, or anything else for that matter?
I don't know who coined the idea of a riding tie family, but it does feel like that. I know when we went to the memorial service for Bud that Franny had planned, and saw people that we hadn't seen for all those years. It was just like, we already knew them so well. It was wonderful.
Indeed. Yeah, I am so thankful for our family. We call it that still, now, and the friends I have in riding tie are just lifelong friends, and will be, I'm sure. So yeah. Good. Well, if somebody were thinking about doing riding tie, this is the last question I like to ask. What advice would you give to them?
Get fit. And make sure your horse is fit. If you have control over the horse and you're not just riding someone else's horse. It's fine to be competitive, but you've got to do it with good sense. And something about the cooperation, the three-way cooperation with the horse. The horse is an amazing animal, and they once they take you into their herd or consider themselves part of your herd, there's just no limit to what they'll do for you.
Yeah, it is stunning, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
So you combine that with a running partner that you can take care of each other and encourage each other and all that. It's a wonderful partnership.
Yep, yep. And I don't know of another sport that has two people and an animal. There are sports with obviously human team sports and humans and one animal, but the two people and the one animal is just such a neat team and such a unique thing. So yeah,
you're right. I think so too.
Right. Well, Peter and Martha, thank you so much for giving your time and talking with me. And I'm glad to have met you online. And one of these days I get up to Durham, I want to get to meet you for real.
Good. You go.
Well, don't wait too long.
Yeah, I'm running a track meet next month, and the age group nationals are going to be in Greensboro, USATF, and I've signed up to run the 800 and the 1500 in the 85 to 89 age group.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, those last 3 years, what drops away is a lot each year. So we'll see. I'm going to be really slow, but I'm going to go out and do it.
Well, what an inspiration that is. You are, and I think you told me, you're riding still as well.
Yes, the horse that I was competing on in dressage, I let him go back to our trainer because I didn't have time to keep him fit, and he could just give so much to other people who are coming along. So she's got him now, but we have 3 retired horses in our backyard.
Yeah. And just watching them is endless fun for us. So it's so nice to have them in the backyard. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you. And we hope to get to see you again for too long.
Well, thank you. It was just fun.